yesterday about gun control were a little bit out of taste with what happened.
You know, I've got to say the only people who thought that are folks at the Huffington Post who are trying to politicize things. At the end of the day, most Americans understand fully well there's a qualitative difference between people who are sick and deranged and committing horrible acts of murder, that we should all come together in denouncing the tragic shooting that occurred at the Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston. And we should pray for the families who lost loved ones. Look, I have to say as a Christian, the idea that someone could sit down and pray for an hour in a church and then murder the people that he was praying with, it is horrifying. It is the face of evil. And we should be looking at this as an opportunity to bring people together and to pray for the families. One of the incredible things yesterday was to see the families of those who were murdered calling for forgiveness of the murder. What a powerful demonstration of Christian love. I have to admit, if it were my family, I don't know that I could demonstrate that degree of forgiveness. And it is a shame that there's some in politics that want to use this tragedy to divide us. I think that's wrong. But I also think there's a qualitative difference between that and protecting the Bill of Rights, protecting the constitutional right to keep and bear arms of law-abiding citizens, which is altogether different and unconnected from a horrific murder committed by a sick and deranged individual.
Senator Cruz, you talk a lot about protecting the Second Amendment. Would you have any restrictions on buying guns or having to register guns? How would you treat gun ownership?
You know, we have in place right now federal law that requires a background check. If you purchase a firearm at a federally licensed dealer, you have a background check. And I would note, 2 years ago, we were facing another tragedy. The shooting at Newtown, Connecticut. And every one of us who were parents, particularly parents of young kids, you couldn't help but be horrified at what happened in Newtown. And that was another example where President Obama could have used that as an opportunity to bring us together. He could have used it as an opportunity to bring people together to say, let's go after violent criminals. Let's target bad guys. Let's do what we can to protect our kids. But instead, he didn't. Instead, President Obama and Senate Democrats cynically used the tragedy at Newtown to try to push a legislative agenda to restrict the right to keep and bear arms of law-abiding citizens. I think that was wrong and it was a mistake, and I helped lead the fight to stop President Obama's efforts to take away our right to keep and bear arms. Now, I would note a critical piece of defeating that was that I joined with Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley in drafting what became known as the law enforcement alternative. Grassley-Cruz was the legislation. It was comprehensive gun legislation, but unlike President Obama's, it wasn't targeted at law-abiding citizens. It was targeted at bad guys. So, for example, under President Obama, roughly 50,000 felons and fugitives had attempted to illegally buy firearms, had come in to licensed gun dealers, had tried to buy firearms, and yet had disclosed they were felons, they were fugitives. And of those, and this was, I believe, the 2010 year, the Obama administration had only prosecuted 44. 44 out of, I believe, 54,000, although we'll double check on those stats, but I believe it's 44 out of 54,000. Now, in my view, that's totally unacceptable. If you have a violent felon, if you have a fugitive who's trying to illegally buy guns, we should come down on them like a ton of bricks. I want to know if they're murderers and rapists, they're coming in trying to get guns, we ought to go and stop them. And yet the Obama administration prosecuted 44 out of 54,000 felons and fugitives illegally trying to buy guns. Likewise, under President Obama, the prosecution of violent gun crimes dropped dramatically from the Bush administration. The Bush administration created what was known as Project Exile, targeting violent gun felons. If you use a gun in a violent crime, we will come down on you like a ton of bricks. The Obama Justice Department devoted far less time and energy to do so, and the prosecution rates have plummeted. Additionally, one of the things President Obama did is he slashed the funding for school safety by roughly $300 million. He cut the budgeting for school safety. So what did Grassley-Cruz do? We worked together to say, let's focus on the bad guys. So we focused on let's target violent felons and fugitives. The felon comes in and tries to illegally buy a gun, we're going to prosecute that felon. We're going to go after that felon. We're going to put real time and resources to prosecuting those who commit gun crimes. You know, Governor Nikki Haley in South Carolina said this individual who committed the heinous murder in South Carolina should be subject to the death penalty. And I got to say, the death penalty was designed for people who commit horrid crimes like this. And we also had funding to restore the school safety funding that the Obama administration had cut. Now, what happened? When that came to the Senate floor, Ted Cruz received a majority vote on the floor of the Senate. Mind you, this is in the Harry Reid Democratic Senate. It received more bipartisan votes than any of the comprehensive gun legislation that was introduced. 52 votes, including, I believe, 9 Democrats voted for it. The only reason Ted Cruz didn't get passed is because Harry Reid and the Senate Democrats filibustered it. Because they weren't willing to come together and go after violent criminals. Their focus was simply on restricting the constitutional rights of law-abiding citizens. The men and women gathered here who were exercising their constitutional rights, we should protect them, and that's entirely consistent with going after the bad guys.
One more question.
Last question, guys.
What would you say to Governor Perry yesterday slipped up calling it an accident, as I just did? What do you think about the media firestorm that's kind of been generated from all of that?
Look, I don't know what Governor Perry's comment is, so I'm not going to comment on a comment that I didn't hear the original comment. But I'll do one more question.
All right, thank you.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thanks.